Our point was that white and black Southern culture related and crossed each other. And we were coming out of the civil rights movement, and that we could put white musicians and black musicians on stages in the South. It was really, really scary getting to the hall because you had to travel through towns, and we had to deal with that sometimes. But we could get them on the stage, and there was a statement we could make about the culture and the sharing in the culture that might be helpful as the South tried to contend with where we were going with the civil rights movement issues. I didn't know how to fight all my life. I had to teach myself. The biggest thing I had to overcome was this voice inside that said, if you do this, you'll kill yourself. You'll get killed. It was just so loud. And stepping across that inner voice was really traumatic for me. I discovered if you don't cross that line, you never meet yourself. You never become who you can be unless you can get past your socialization, where that older generation has told you what they have learned about survival. You actually have to break ranks with it, or you will never meet yourself. And it's like stepping outside of a safety zone. It is very hard to do. But if you ever do it, you'll always know how to risk your life. In our culture, anything you do disappears the minute you stop doing it. And freedom is like that. People think you are born into freedom. The only freedom you have is the freedom you're exercising. And sitting down thinking it's going to be there when you need it, it is going to give you a big surprise.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to those of you here in person and those of you online for a very special program this morning. This program is entitled, or this entire series is entitled For the Common Good, Smithsonian Voices on Our Shared Future 250. And it's a series of conversations featuring Smithsonian staff, community partners, and thought leaders, exploring how our work illuminates the ideals of a nation and contributes to our shared future. My name is Marjorie Hunt, and I'm a curator and education specialist with the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. For the Common Good is one of several spotlight programs this summer organized by the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage to mark the 250th anniversary and the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We're grateful to our sponsors. This program received funding as part of the Smithsonian's Our Shared Future 250 initiative to commemorate the nation's 250th anniversary. Please see our QR code or posted around the hall here, or visit our website at festival.si.edu for a full schedule of the featured sessions. Although I must say today is our last day of programming. We've been here since June 16th, bringing you amazing behind-the-scene glimpses to all the just inspiring work that Smithsonian staff and partners do for the common good. But I'm pleased to say that this session and all of our sessions have been live streamed and have been archived so that you can visit these sessions on our YouTube channel. If you just go to festival.si.edu, you'll find them, and there's just an incredible richness and diversity of information and knowledge that's been shared over the course of these 4 weeks. Our panelists will be taking questions from the audience, both in person and those of you online. Just please put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. ASL interpretation and live real-time captioning are being provided for this discussion, and assisted listening is also available. Receivers can be obtained from the accessibility information table located in the marketplace just behind us there in the North Hall. And now I'm pleased to welcome our panelists for this morning's session. I'm just so excited. It's going to be so inspiring and powerful. It's entitled Freedom in the Air, the Enduring Legacy of Bernice Johnson Reagon's Work at the Smithsonian. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for this morning's panel discussion, Crystal Klingenberg, who is Curator of Music at the National Museum of American History. Can we please make them welcome?
Thank you all for joining us today. I want to first read a biography of Dr. Reagon and then introduce our illustrious guests. So, I was here before I came. When I die, I'm not leaving. Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagon, singer and song leader, civil rights activist, scholar, and Smithsonian Folkways recording artist, had a profound influence upon the Smithsonian and its work. Bernice's Smithsonian career began in 1969 when she curated a program for the 1970 Festival of American Folklife, Black Music Through the Languages of the New World. Shortly afterward, she laid the foundation for the festival's innovative African Diaspora program, 1973 to 1976, which she described, quote, as part of a world family of culture based in Africa and extending to the Caribbean and Latin America to the United States, end quote. Dr. Reagon's work followed her to the National Museum of American History, where she founded the program in Black American culture, presenting performances, exhibitions, workshops, and symposia. As a curator with the museum's Division of Community Life, she advocated for the need for collections and exhibitions representing the African American experience and conducted pioneering scholarly research. Throughout her career, she lent her expertise to scores of community groups, museums, scholars, and educators. So that's who we're talking about today. So who are we talking with today? Starting with Niani Kilkenny. Niani, can you introduce yourself?
I can. Can you, am I mic'd? Okay, I got a thumbs up. I'm Niani Kilkenny. I am, I would say, a protege of Bernice Johnson Reagon. And I say that in all due respect and with much pride. I came to the Smithsonian to work with Bernice in 1982. I am an activist. I have a career from Howard University's WHUR in broadcast management. I was public affairs director there. I came to the Smithsonian to coordinate Bernice's program in Black American culture And after she left and moved into the curatorial division of the National Museum of American History, she designated me successor, and I became director of the program that she founded. I am still an activist. I'm a native Washingtonian, and I am the proud parent of 3 children, 3 granddaughters, and 5 great-grandchildren. My oldest great-grandson just graduated from University of North Carolina, Pembroke, and he is a history major focusing in African American history. I'm glad to be among you because there's nothing I can find more exciting and wonderful than talking about Bernice Johnson Reagon with James Early and Crystal Klingenberg. Thank you.
And James?
My name is James Early. I'm a series of former, in terms of my relationship here at the Smithsonian, former Assistant Secretary for Education and Public Service, Director of Cultural Heritage Policy at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, and a stint at the Anacostia Museum as interim director. I came to Washington in 1971 with Bernice as a Ford Foundation Fellow. We were undergraduates she at Spelman and I at Morehouse in Atlanta, Georgia. And I became a formal part of the extended family. She accepted my calling her my sister, and she always recognized me as one of her brothers.
So let's start at the beginning. We've already kind of started to scratch the surface. So you've given us a sense of how you first came in contact with Dr. Reagon, but what were your earliest impressions of her?
My earliest impressions of Bernice was seeing her walk across the Morehouse campus as she was leaving Spelman College, going to her house, which sat on the corner of Morehouse College, with a big head of hair, a long, tight skirt, and a serious stride. And then I was taken to her house by the late Charles Freeney, who was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee who knew Bernice. And I saw her as a parent, as a mother with 2 children, very disciplined with her children, very focused on her academic work, a very serious, self-determined, self-assured person. So that's how I first came into contact. Later years working at the Martin Luther King Documentation Center with Bernice's sister in the archives, Mary Francis, I got a call from Bernice asking if I had access to a tape recorder and if I knew how to use the tape recorder. She was always very direct in her engagement with not only me, but with everyone. And I said, yes. These were the days of the big German Heuer tape recorder, which felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but it was the best tape recorder in the world at that time. And she asked me to come and spend 2 days tape recording a Black songwriters conference. So that is the first time that I saw her in a research, more formal academic arena.
Bernice, her reputation preceded her. I had known of Bernice throughout the SNCC activist years. I didn't really get to interact with Bernice until the DC Black Repertory Company, when Bernice was engaged with training song workshop at that space. And I always found her to be, to me, iconic because I was such a fan. I was a groupie. And I had a chance to work with Bernice when I came to the mall. I was at Howard University Radio, and I was covering the festival, and Bernice was here, and I was looking at everything. This was pre-1976, and admiring. And then I contacted Bernice and asked her if she would advise me, because I was doing a radio documentary on the civil rights movement. And I knew if I wanted to get that right, I needed Bernice's advice. And she said, yes, I will. I will advise you, but I need you to be open to what I say and my criticism. And I said, Bernice, not to worry. I did that. It was an exciting, amazing partnership. And then I did some work with Bernice at Howard University Radio with some work she was doing with setting June Jordan's poetry to music. That was exciting. So I had a chance to see who this woman I absolutely adored was in her milieu, in her world, and I had nothing but respect and admiration for her skills, her focus, her thoroughness, and her ability to bring to the fore, to the public, all of the stuff she knew and she had researched. I was very, very excited to know her and to be in her company.
That's beautiful. You know, one thing that we talked about in preparation for this panel was Dr. Reagon as a polymath, right? Having all of these different skill sets that could be brought into the play, whether it's her musical brilliance, kind of organizational brilliance, scholarly brilliance of one kind or another. And I think one thing that I'm enjoying about speaking with you this morning is the opportunity to focus on more of what was like less of the musical and more on the kind of Smithsonian scholarly and organizational piece. So, you know, as you think about her approach to the work that she was doing here, you know, how was her approach to public history and cultural interpretation different than other folks at Smithsonian at the time?
You know, I think it's hard to categorize Bernice. While there is one way of approaching it that she was an interdisciplinary specialist, she's trained as a historian, she's a song leader coming out of the civil rights movement, she's a composer. She wrote theater compositions. Interdisciplinary, I think, probably does not capture her. Bernice was a particular synthesis. Probably since her early childhood when she entered elementary school at 3 years of age, passed the first grade, and then because of the lack of teachers in the school that she was in, by the time she was in the 4th grade, she was asked by the institution to tutor children in the 1st and 2nd grade. There's something extraordinary about that background. I think Bernice was an organic intellectual before she was a formally trained intellectual. And her formal training as an intellectual is really informed by her organic relationship to her community. She was very conscious of her community, of who she was. She was very conscious that music was history, that music was documentation, that music was self-actualization. There is one quote from her that says, "When you sing together, you find common ground," the theme of this 250-year anniversary. She brought all of that into the Smithsonian. Now, there are other people who are trained in their communities and go off to get formal education. But formal education tends to be the validating aspect, whereas for her, the community was always the validating aspect. And I'll just note one last point here. There's much that Bernice talked about, so there's much documentation to be found in her own voice, rather than those of us who would interpret her. She was extraordinarily and profoundly reflective of who she was, where she came from, what she was thinking. And so her academic methodology is actually drawn from congregational singing, which comes out of the community, the church community in which she was raised, and where the educational level would have been, from a formal sense, very, very low, but from a sense-making and intellectual ability to make sense of one's life, to take one's agency, she was very conscious of that, and she brought that to the Academy, and she brought that to the Smithsonian, and she brought the community to the Smithsonian, not as objects of our research and interpretation as we are often oriented within the Academy or within the museum curatorial world, but she brought community voices as colleagues, as validators of their own experience. And I can remember community people sitting on panels with people with PhDs who had written numerous books it changed the whole calculus of how we understood what is knowledge, what is knowledge making. And I think therein lies her distinction historically, and I think therein lies her legacy still living within the Smithsonian, particularly through the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, which is a distinct, really sui generis entity coming from a disciplinary background in which people were not clear whether folklore is a part of English department or sociology department. It's not ever been really a formally validated discipline. When she brought community voices as agents of their own validation through the Folklife Festival, as was already being done with Ralph Rensler and others, but in a more profound way, it was then diffused throughout the Smithsonian and ends up not only in the Museum of American History, but you can sit around. Let me just close by saying this, that while Bernice came from the community, there is an antecedent to Bernice's arrival, to the arrival of Ralph Rensler or any of us here, and that is the Anacostia Museum, which is a sui generis entity, perhaps the most sui generis museum entity within the Smithsonian complex, because it came out of ordinary people who began to say, this is who I am, and these are the objects and the sayings and the thinking and the events that validate how I look at the world. And that came into the Smithsonian. That gets very little credit. The Folklife program, though, is the more formal center in which then Bernice enters and begins to infuse that throughout the curatorial dimensions of the Smithsonian, which had impact on administration, the diversity of administrators, particularly the diversity of curators, which then opens up the diversity of collections, which opens up new opportunities for interpretive perspectives and new scholars.
Thank you.
And James, you talked about Bernice and community. Community was essential in Bernice's formula, but I want to talk about her approach. And one of the things about her approach that I found compelling was actually in a dedication she made to a publication, a 1976 publication. And that dedication speaks volumes. And in her own words, I'm going to go to it. Bernice wrote, "There are times when an event subtly but decisively affects our lives. This journal was in its final stages of development when Reverend Jesse Johnson passed on March 5th, 1976. As a minister steeped in Black oration and song leading, as a carpenter, citizen, parent, friend, and elder, Reverend Johnson was involved in the development and preservation of Black culture. She located her dad, Reverend Johnson, as a developer, and that approach was consistent with how Bernice not only framed her perspective, but how she actualized it. Bernice talked about having to navigate and negotiate distances within and between. And that's important to lift up, and I'm going to go back again to her own words. She said, as a scholar and program conceptualizer, I am especially interested in culturally derived relationships within the Black American community, and the other set of relationships governing the connections between the Black American community and the larger white-dominated society. She said the dialectics of the latter interactions are intensified when one considers that I direct a program in the Smithsonian in Black American culture charged with carrying out research, analysis, presentation, and dissemination projects on various aspects of Black American life and culture. I am concerned with the principles and values created by and within the culture I am studying. That was her approach.
Let me just add to this, because Beatrice Wise Johnson, her mother, is also a pivotal point for Bernice in how she looked at the world. She wrote a song and she sang about her mother, but her mother was connected to other women, particularly other women in the church. And so while the Black community is a context for her, the sociology of that, I would suggest, particularly for young researchers who may be in the audience or who may be listening in, when you go to take a look and do research on her, put a particular focus on Black women, Black working class women, Black women who ran the house, Black women who upheld, in her case, the several children in the family, and certainly her itinerant father who went from church to church. It was Beatrice Wise Johnson who is a centerpiece in that. So a woman's focus is also very critical in her academic work and her compositional work when you go to take a look at her legacy. I think the upshot now for the common good and the 250th anniversary of the country going forward is to what extent that aspect of Bernice Reagon is manifest within the Smithsonian Institution, perhaps, hopefully, the next secretary being one of those women.
I just want to signpost a couple of very important things that we may take for granted in our enjoyment in this reflection on Dr. Reagon, right? The courage, the bravery, the directness. She was so ahead of her time. I want to really signpost that, especially on the, not just concern with community, but community as praxis. I think, there are ways in which history is catching up to things, history, big H, is catching up to things that folklore had already been in the mix with. I am more of an anthropologist, hiding among the historians, so I might be a little bit biased there. But the methodologies and the concerns that she had that were vitally important then are certainly vitally important now, and coming from the perspective of somebody who sits more directly in her legacy in that respect, to be pushing for those same concerns 40, 50 years ago is both invigorating and, it shows how much further we still have to go, right? I want to cast our minds back to earlier folklife festivals and thinking about the African Diaspora work and 1976. We reflect a little bit about because as somebody who was not present at the time, I only hear the most amazing things about that particular festival. And so can you speak a little bit to Bernice's work in the context of those times?
Well, it was an extraordinary time in which Bernice was at the center of gravity of that time at the Folklife Festival. It was an unprecedented, I think, 12-week festival celebrating the bicentennial of the Republic at that time. The African Diaspora concept was actually brought into the Smithsonian by Gerald Davis. And someone needs to do research of how and why Gerald did not stay for the full time. Bernice actually centered the intellectual and research and organizational administrative dimensions of that festival. A few takeaways I think very important for this contemporary generation, again, as we think about the common good going forward. We were graduate students. Bernice called me, and she stood early, as she always called me early. The Smithsonian would like for you to come down to see them. It turned out Bernice wanted the Smithsonian to see me. The Smithsonian didn't have any idea. But Gerald Davis was a graduate student at Rutgers at that time, working on a PhD. Bernice and I were graduate students working on PhDs at Howard University. There's another young man whose name escapes me now who was working on a PhD or a master's degree in architecture at Howard. That's an extraordinary breakthrough that graduate students came in to run a program. Now, a lot of that has to do with Ralph Rensler, which is another subject matter that I think the Smithsonian and Folklife should review in depth, because Bernice was, by her own admission, pushy. She said, I'm difficult. She was right out front. She wrote about it. I can be difficult to work with. So when you asked Bernice to join you in something, you were asking her to not take a part in it, but she was you were asking her to take a look at the whole thing, and if you really had a keen sense of who she was, you had to be ready that she was going to deconstruct the whole thing and reconstruct it again, and you were going to be right there with her, and you were going to get the credit for having put the proposal on the table. Another distinguishing characteristic of Bernice in the Smithsonian was when she did not know something, she was right up front. I don't have a clue of what this means. Find me somebody. That could be a major academic, or it could be an undergraduate or a graduate student. And they were going to get credit for their contributions because Bernice understood that she was another kind of force. And that was always going to be recognized first by her and validated first by her. And so she had no problem of giving credit to someone else. She looked not only from the academic arena. When we were doing the African Diaspora program, Always in the New World was basically a look at Europe and how European culture manifests in very plural and diverse ways here in the United States. The African Diaspora concept manifested how enslaved Africans had agency during the time of slavery, post-slavery, how they brought ways of knowing and doing with them, how they invented a whole new dimension of the extension of Africa called the African Diaspora. Remember, at this time, the term diaspora was a term almost exclusively limited to an understanding of the Jewish diaspora. There were no constructs of Guatemalan diasporas or UK diasporas or Netherlands diasporas. Now that's commonplace because we live in a globalized world in which those familial and other kinds of connections are more manifest than it was then. So this was a dramatic breakthrough. So Bernice said, these countries cannot afford to support traditional culture coming to the United States for this Folklife Festival as many European countries. And so she organized to go do fundraising. She led as a graduate student, curator, administrator, organizer. She took the Smithsonian forward. I'll conclude on this point. Alan Lomax, a renowned folklorist who did some extraordinary things. Bess Lomax Hawes was the founding director of the Folklife program at the National Endowment for the Arts. This is very interesting because folklore is the only humanities discipline that is institutionalized within the federal complex, both the Endowment for the Arts, the Endowment for the Humanities, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Library of Congress. That's an extraordinary development for a discipline that was never quite clearly recognized as a discipline that deals with the ways of knowing and doing of ordinary, everyday people and the profundity of their contributions, their recipes, their songs, their religious expressions, their crafts. So in this context, Bernice really opened up the Smithsonian and opened up the Folklife directorship and was in many ways a de facto senior director in the Center for Folklife, or was it actually then not the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, as well as a curator. So those are, I think, other distinguishing elements. Again, with young academics, young people in the audience as you go forward, Bernice always said, be careful of those one-dimensional people. You really have to you have to find all of the manifestations within yourself actually to be yourself, to cross that line, to put your voice forward. So those were other distinguishing characteristics that I would urge people to take a deeper look of how she influenced the Smithsonian Institution at large, from the castle across the museum, and particularly within education programs, because educators were not really seen as equal to curators at that time. Education was not seen as substantive a discipline as it has subsequently become.
No, James, I really appreciate you kind of triangulating where her efforts sat, not only inside of Smithsonian, but in this larger world of, I guess we could say, federal support for folk life of one kind or another, because the kind of institution building that we're talking about is extraordinarily difficult.
Yes.
And as, again, I'm representative of the legacy in this way, learning about the ways in which it was her brilliance, it was her forthrightness, it's all of this. It was very important to getting the things done. Right? I wanted to engage you both on her activism in the context, the living this, it's an argument, it's a dual life of activism inside an institution, and how she was able to, again, get done the things to get done in that context.
I think, I think Bernice was effective because she was clear. She knew what her source was. And she knew from her experience in the civil rights movement how to move through barriers and how to knock down doors. One of the things that struck me was that when Bernice asked me to come work with her, she said, because I said, I don't want to work for the Smithsonian. I'm not doing it. She said, no, I want you to come and work with me to bring in as much African American history and content into this place before we turn the corner on the century. She was talking about before we became 21st century. She said, because our history and culture is foundational, and if these people don't know our history and culture, they won't know themselves. Right. And if it's not up in here, we don't know where it will be. So come, and I said I would. One of the things about Bernice, because of her skill and activism, was knowing that she had to be clear about the role of coalition building in the execution of her work. And her coalition included the scholars and the practitioners of the culture in the communities that she was emphasizing. Her coalition included the community. The community was part of coalition and consciously built a grassroots community that knew what to expect at any given time from the program and was invested, because that's the way it was designed, to say, if y'all don't do this program, we're calling people up and we'll be down there. Right. So she had scholars, participants, and community, and the public. And the scholars were not only in academia, they were community and lay scholars, experts. So this coalition was essential for her to bring forth her concepts inside of a place that was designed to counter those attempts to say, well, this isn't what we're trying to do. And she would say, well, why not? And then she would make the point, like she would do down there in Albany, Georgia, or anywhere else, and say, why not? Stand firmly on the ground and say, this is why you need to do it. And there are some aspects of that kind of intention that I think held up and helped us go forward, like insisting that we feed our people. That sounds like a small thing.
No, it isn't.
Smithsonian said, we don't have no budget. She said, oh, no. In our culture, we sit at the welcome table. We break bread. We have to build that into policy. So she understood what policy was and how to change it, how to rewrite it, how to rewrite position descriptions. I remember when she said, I need you to get Reverend C.J. Johnson from Southwest Georgia up here to talk about the spiritual traditions of Southwest Georgia. I called Reverend C.J. Johnson and said, we're going to get you on the plane. Reverend Johnson said, Dee, daughter, if God intended to me to fly, he'd have given me wings. I ain't flying. I need a trained sleeper coach. The Smithsonian said, well, we can't do that because the cheapest way is to fly, and the sleeper coach called. Oh, no. We had to write up, Reverend C.J. Johnson ain't flying, and for us to be true to this thing, you got to bring, and then he said, and I got to bring my Amen Corner. They said, we can't bring on, excuse me. So the kinds of responses were, this is what you have to do. She had to write. She had to name, like naming African diaspora. We said, Ain't no African diaspora. She said, up in here there is.
Right.
So to name things, because that is you don't know my name. Mm-hmm. So I have to tell you. And then you have to change what you think you know in order to do what is actual. So that's the kind of stuff that Bernice understood as an activist moving into this space, and how she had to stand in her activism to make sure her scholarship was delivered to this coalition in an honest way, full of integrity, and she did it.
She always talked about herself as an organizer. We must remember that and it's very important to remember this right now, the civil rights movement was a movement against white supremacy terror. This was a period of terrorism. Bernice was a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of these young people. I think they were making $10 a week, and they moved from city to city, not knowing anybody, to find out where were the people, both black and white, who were ready to take agency, to break through the barrier of American apartheid at the risk of being gunned down, of being lynched, of being raped. We must remember those stories, particularly on this 250th anniversary. And so she was an organizer. She was also a song leader, which is another form of organizing, which comes organically out of the church where she stood forth. There are many quotations about her and the power of her voice, of how it convened other voices to prepare to go and to confront white terror just to vote. So her organizational skills were always a part of that, coming first before the Civil Rights Movement, really out of her work as a young student within her church, the NAACP. I think she organized a youth chapter on what was then Albany College's campus. I had mentioned Alan Lomax before and the renowned nature of his work, because when he was asked to review the African Diaspora projection, he said, oh no, there's nothing here. These are graduate students, this can't be done. But to his credit, after coming to see the first presentation, he bit his tongue, which was unusual for Alan Lomax. And he said, little did I know, I'm really paraphrasing, he didn't quite say it that way, but that was the upshot of it. He was impressed with what he saw. This was all really the intellectual conception of Bernice Reagon, because she was an organizer, and the Civil Rights Movement was always a part of it. I was working at the National Endowment for the Humanities between 79 and 84, and one day leaving the building for lunch, Bernice was entering the building. I said, what are you doing here, sister? And she says, I'm here to talk about a proposal, and I think she was looking for $25,000, $30,000 or something. I said, oh no, let's go for some big money. I've learned how to get big money out of here. She got a few $100,000 or more out of the National Endowment for the Humanities for the Civil Rights Program. Perhaps, and this is something that needs to be researched, when we think about oral histories, we think about one-to-one interviews. This was a group conference oral history with the community people sitting in the audience, sitting on panels with people who had written books. And it was a multi-logical event in, what's that auditorium in American history?
Carmichael.
In the Carmichael Auditorium. It was packed. People from all over the South who had been involved in the Civil Rights Movement were sitting in the audience, some of them on the stage. And as issues were being raised and talked about on the stage, people in the audience would not raise their hand. They would stand up and say, oh, no, 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 no. Not her cousin, it was her uncle, or it was the aunt. No, no, you got the date wrong, or this was not the motive issue. All of this was an oral history being taped simultaneously through a call and response methodology, which Bernice didn't say, I want you to bring the call and response methodology into this audience. She understood that that was the organic way of validating what was true and untrue within that methodology within the church and in the community. Bernice also, when cornrowing came in, perhaps the first exhibition in the country, you might talk on this because you may have been there when it was done. Bernice did an exhibition in American history on cornrowing. She said to me once, she said, "Early, the first exhibition I'm going to do is going to be on radio." This is another way of her mind, because what is radio? We think of radio as orality and listening, a passive audience. But what is radio? Radio is orality that creates an image and the dynamics of an event, of a profile, of an artifact, and an engagement in a multifaceted, multivocal kind of way with an audience that is not sitting before you. Bernice understood the power. I'd never heard anyone say, "I'm going to do an exhibition on radio," but that was the way that her creative mind operated.
Yeah, I would like to jump in on, because you were circling and swirling, because one of the things about Bernice, and this is part of her model in building that coalition and working with scholars and fellows and interns, et cetera, and the public, was to make sure that what we did gave access to that coalition, to the resources at the Smithsonian. When she told me that I should come and work for her, she asked me clearly if I had a mission, and I did, African American history and culture. She said, "If you don't have a mission, don't come." She said, "Because this ain't no job." Right. And then she said, "I want you to be very clear that the reason I am doing what I am doing is to make sure that these people have access to what is here. And if you cannot provide access to the resources at the Smithsonian, you are wasting space." So providing access is how we got the interdisciplinary scholars, fellows, etc., like Dr. Portia Maltsby, who was a postdoc, who came up in here to deepen her work on Black music, rhythm and blues, etc. And it's because of Portia that we did the exhibit on radio. So it's the kinds of connections that, when I'm looking at the breadth and depth of the collaborations and partnerships, public and private, scholarly, academic, community, and making sure these folks could come in here and bring what they had to bring, but get this platform at the Smithsonian for resources, validations. Oh, y'all, you had a year at the Smithsonian? Yes. The Smithsonian, yes. We had high school children who came up in here from Washington, D.C. public schools in the Duke Ellington Youth Project that could walk into the National Museum of American History Archive Center. Thank you, John Fleckner. Reuben Jackson would sit there with these scholars, and the scholars were teachers in D.C. public schools who would take this material and convert it into classroom studies. We had thousands of students who had access through their teachers in schools. This is the kind of work that Bernice perceived was our purpose, and it absolutely made the difference because, as she said, without that, we just wasting space.
It's almost time to turn to Q&A. Time is flying. But I do want to throw something out there. One, that in terms of Portia Maltsby, so I spoke with Dr. Maltsby for an episode of Collected, which is the Black History podcast of the American History Museum, about Dr. Reagon. And it's great to, and Dr. Maltsby's a mentor of mine as an ethnomusicologist, and the ways in which Dr. Reagon gave Dr. Maltby that launch, right? That then ends up propelling Black music studies and ethnomusicology writ large. So there's all these different threads of influence and mentorship and vision that come together. It's also worth mentioning that the papers of the program in Black American culture, they're at the Archive Center. You can make an appointment and see them. I did just this week in preparation for our conversation. I'm wowed by the kinds of convenings that were on the table and that spirit to convene really being at the core of her practice. We also have objects related to Dr. Reagon in the collection. We've got costumes from Sweet Honey in the Rock. We've got all kinds of materials that are part of the national collection that people can come and consult. So I want to make sure that folks know that we do have these materials you can come see. So with the time that we have left, we'll open up for questions. Does anybody have, I have plenty more questions, but do folks in the audience have a question? There's a runner with a microphone so that you can be heard.
Our comments.
Oh yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the great work that you've done, Niani, early, and for the interview. Thank you so much. In this day and age when so much of our culture is being erased, what is it that we can do to protect the work that has been done prior and to make sure that the rest of this stuff doesn't dissipate? Because this administration is very active about erasing African American culture, period.
A fundamentally important question for this framework of the 250th anniversary of the country, and this particular framework that has emerged out of Folklife, because I think this is a Folklife framework of our common good. Is it not? Or is this a writ large Smithsonian? It's a Folklife. Of course it would be a Folklife. Not just because it's the Smithsonian. Of course it would be Folklife of any institutions, public institutions in the United States of America. Who would more organically come up with the notion of our common good other than a Folklife program, which was always about the profundity of the ways of knowing and doing of ordinary people. It was not about who have written the books on ethnomusicology or folklore, the binary structure of the blues. Those are all important formal academic issues. But what are knowledge systems within communities? What is the pedagogy of a community? Not a term that ordinary people would use, but it is a content that ordinary people understand and express because they pass on lessons generation to generation, mother to daughter, church to church members, new generations. This is so DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, Bernice was all about that. About being a Black woman, about being a woman of another perspective in terms of her relationships. Her lifelong partner, Adisa Douglas, is in the audience here with us this evening. About looking at the diversity of human expression, particularly with women musicians, with the founding of the program of Sister Fire and Roadwork. Amy Horowitz is in the audience this evening. So Bernice would say to us that our responsibility is to recognize the whole sociology of knowledge, which means the whole sociology of the population of the United States of America and of the entire world. And to bring that into the largest museum complex in the world with a very simple but profound mandate, the increase and diffusion of knowledge, and she would probably add, in the plural, infinite ways that the diversity of humankind expresses that.
And I would like to say, in the spirit of Bernice, we have to stand fast and hold on. Bernice talked at the 50th anniversary of SNCC at Shaw University. She said every generation, we have to go through this stuff. These people come at us and try to chop off democracy every 50 years. It's y'all's turn. What do we have to do? All I know is that we have to find creative ways to hold on and make sure they can't erase everything. How is that done? I don't know. Memorize stuff. Talk to your kids. There is a group called Citizen Historians which I belong to, that runs around and takes pictures of stuff of how it was. We have to be creative in this situation because these folks are coming for libraries, museums, art institutions, culture, because that's what authoritarians do. So I think that's another conversation. What do we do at this stage to make sure that everything we have collected isn't gone? And that's a revolutionary task at this point in history. And I know Smithsonian is holding on. I am so happy I can do something by saying this, and I hope I can help you all some kind of way. Thank you.
I know we want to get other questions or comments. I just want to add one little factual tidbit as expression of what Bernice did and what she would do today or have us do today. Many of us expected that the first non-Euro-American to be director of the National Museum of American History would be Lonnie Bunch, who was the chief curator at that museum. But it turned out it was Spencer Crew, another African American. When it was announced, I got a call, when the rumor came out, because it hadn't been formally announced, I got a call, Bernice was at home. She said, "Early, call Lonnie Bunch and find out what's happening here." That was not a call against Spencer Crew, but it was an expectation that it would be Lonnie Bunch. And of course, today, the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, we're all happy and proud to say, is Lonnie Bunch. But that's what Bernice did then. That's what she would have us do now, is to defend the integrity of the increase in diffusion of knowledge and the very well-trained curatorial and educational staff that puts on these exhibitions and invites the public in a multi-logical inquiry, not saying open up your minds, let us tell you what the truth is, but saying here is what we have found and what we can offer. Come and engage and bring your perspective to it. So I think Bernice, certainly as an organizer and as one who was keen on the foundational issues, again, of the sociology of this country and its diversity, its inclusion, and its equity, that's what she would be telling us.
Another question?
Hi, first I wanted to really thank my forever colleagues, James Early, Niani Kilkenny, and for this incredible discussion, which is so important that we are sitting here in this place and able to do this across the street from whatever that is. But the main thing, I actually came on board on the shoulders of Bernice's legacy after Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagon, and has been a senior curator at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And so many of the things that you've mentioned that have pervaded throughout the Smithsonian and throughout the society are still having an impact, and as you're rightly mentioning, are now in a point after that 50 years of being defended. I was also a student of Gerald Davis, and he was my mentor as well. And I think that I wonder, in terms of this next generation, where you see that responsibility sitting, specifically since we know that so much of the knowledge is under attack, so much of the history is under attack. Where do you see, what would you say to young people coming into this field right now? And I'm happy to say that the field of folklore, and really conscious progressive folklore, has expanded greatly in the past few years. But what would you tell those young people who are coming on as interns and as young scholars and as young community historians?
Listen to what has happened. Find out what we did. Find out what Reverend Johnson and my parents and your parents did. Study that, and then you tell me where you're going to put it in this AI new technology age. I have some very fierce offspring who are ready to take it up. They just need to know what to do next and how to keep moving forward with the information we've given them so that they can do the stuff we talked about Bernice building for their kids. They are ready. And from what I can see, and it's empirical, but these young people are ready. They just need to know what we said we did. They need to see it and then move forward. And there's some great work being done by SNCC Legacy Project on passing information on to the new generation of activists. I think as cultural, artists, institutional people, we need to do the same thing.
I would say to them what Bernice said in the opening of this program. There was a video run. She said, first you have to cross your own voice. You have to dialogue with yourself, and you have to appreciate but break with the traditions that you've been given to you by your family and by your community. These young people have new voices. We have to listen to them. Someone listened to Bernice when she was 3 years old and said, you belong in first grade. And by the time she was in fourth grade, they looked around and said, we don't have enough teachers. She can teach. So that says for what the people we call interns, they are our colleagues. We don't want to romanticize it that they know as much as we do. Sometimes they know as much as we do, maybe even more, but they don't have the experience that we have. We have to cross those boundaries. Anne Romaine is coming to my mind. Anne Romaine was an extraordinary Southern belle. She and Bernice broke boundaries. They did the first interracial folk festivals in the United States. Bernice was always looking cross boundaries. She was also a colleague. Another spirit comes to my mind right now is Pete Reiniger. She loved the work of Pete Reiniger. Pete Reiniger's wife is sitting in the audience. She said, the way that he understands sound. So we talk about her as a black woman, we talk about the black community, we talk about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in a country that, despite the diversity of Native peoples, and that 1/3 of the country spoke Spanish before the frontier was changed and the anthem was changed, Bernice was always looking beyond all of that. That was this extraordinarily magical synthesis she had. And something that Amy Harrod and I wrote on the 80th birthday of Bernice in the Journal of American Folklore, we came across a quote. Again, go online, you can find, she wrote a lot of things. She said, I'm a song leader, I'm a civil rights leader, I'm a parent, I'm and so forth, but I am also a medium. Now this is a dimension that for academics and whatnot, we don't quite know how to interrogate. She said, when things are right, the ancestors come through me. I was reading a piece by the renowned Ethelbert Miller, who is the de facto poet laureate of the DMV, who also referred to her as a medium. He was talking about how when she sang at various places, you could feel people healing. She had many, many dimensions that she understood, and it's hard for us to get an academic handle on that. So that is what I would say to the young people. Be yourself. Open up your own voice to your own ears, and then put it out in the public space, and then defend it and rectify it as you need be. But don't be in this vertical structure is that I'm just a mere undergraduate, or I'm just a mere intern, or I am a postdoc almost there. Once you cross that boundary of talking to yourself and saying, I'm going into the public space, as she went into the public space as a 3-year-old, went into college as a 16-year-old, raised 2 children, took several years. She was 5 years older than me, but that's why we were coincidentally, I graduated the year before she did. She graduated the same year with my wife, who's also sitting in the audience. That's what I would say to young people. Be yourself, manifest yourself, put your voice out there.
And with that, we're at time. So we're going to have a short video to play to cue us out, but can we thank our panel for today to start with? Thank you so much for sharing these incredible recollections, and with that,
There's a better of a waiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. I was standing by my window on a cold and cloudy day when I saw the earth come rolling, but it came down the way. Oh, will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better of a waiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. Well, I told the undertaker, please drive slow. For the lady you are holding, oh, I had to see her go. Oh, will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better of a waiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
I cannot thank you enough for being here as we celebrate Bernice. As we close our run of For the Common Good, please give one more round of applause for this extraordinary panel. My name is Sabrina Lynn Motley. I'm the director of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and it has been my great pleasure and my honor to work on this series with my colleagues, and I want to thank them. Marjorie Hunt, who's here. Betty Belanis, who's back there, and Arlene Reiniger. Ashley Corin, and you all spoke so beautifully about this next generation, and we have interns who work tirelessly on this program. Nini Bott is there. Miranda Glasgow Miranda is back there. We also had help from Sarah Rothman and Addie King, and together they have done such remarkable work, bringing the voices across the Smithsonian to inspire us, to challenge us, and to remind us why this moment, this 250 moment, is something that should both inspire us and also challenge us. There were so many words that we take away from this talk. Before we turn the corner, stand fast and hold on. And I mean, you know what I know. That's the thing that we must do together right now, stand fast and hold on. So I thank my colleagues, I thank you all, and I wish you all a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. Marjorie has the last word.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And speaking on behalf of myself and all of us who've worked on this, it's really been such an honor and a privilege to work with our amazing colleagues across the Smithsonian and with thought leaders and partners from the community. So thank you so much for this. And one more, give it up for this incredible panel, Niani Kilkenny, James Early, and Crystal Klingenberg. We also would like to thank our stage managers, Rachel Cross, our audio engineer, Dakota Jones, Troy Hamford and his team with Summit Webcasting for our live stream today, and our ASL interpreters, Francis and William, and live captioner, Darian. Thanks so much. And we will be back for our very last session at 1 o'clock. So you won't want to miss Preserving the Smithsonian's Collections, Working at the Museum Conservation Institute. That will be at 1 o'clock this afternoon. We invite you to please feel free to post your comments on our message board at the back of the hall. We'd love to learn about your thoughts on the Smithsonian, your memories of a experience that stayed with you, also stories that you would like the Smithsonian to tell in the future. And we invite you to shop at our wonderful Folklife Marketplace featuring handcrafted items from American artisans and a variety of activities with craftspeople. So while this program, it's our last day today, the Marketplace and other activities in the Arts and Industries building will be open through tomorrow through the end of the day. And that includes our absolutely wonderful Storied Objects exhibition, showcasing objects and stories from past Smithsonian Folklife festivals, and also enjoy the Marketplace Radio Corner, where the documentary Power of Community Radio is highlighted. We also want to bring to your attention just the very special American Aspirations exhibition next door at the newly reopened Smithsonian Castle. It was on view until July 26th and features some treasured iconic objects from around the Smithsonian that speak to the ideals in the Declaration of Independence. Finally, don't miss Voices and Votes, Exploring Democracy Across America here in our West Hall. And thank you all so much for being such a great audience. And one more thing.
Sorry, we have one more quick thing. Our lovely interns have brought cupcakes and snacks, and they want to share them with you. So they're in the back. Enjoy.
Our lovely interns indeed. We just couldn't have done it without them. They're the absolute best. And thanks for acknowledging that. The next generation, we are in good hands. Thanks, everyone.